Is he gonna attack Hogan? What is going on here?
The Ultimate Warrior was one of the most unforgettable names in wrestling. If you watched WWF in the late 80s or early 90s, you remember him. Wild face paint, huge muscles, sprinting to the ring at full speed, shaking the ropes like he was about to tear them down. He had an energy that made crowds go crazy, and for a while he was at the very top. He won the Intercontinental and WWF championships, even beating Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6. But while fans saw him as a larger-than-life hero, the people who worked with him often had a very different opinion. Behind the scenes, he was a man hated by everyone. Why? Let's get into it. A big part of the problem was his attitude. Plenty of wrestlers say he didn't seem to care much about the business or the people in it. He kept to himself, avoided the locker room, and gave off this vibe that he was above everyone else. Bobby Heenan, who managed wrestlers and worked as a commentator, flat out said he didn't like Warrior. He told one story about asking Warrior not to hit him in the neck during a match because of an injury. Warrior went ahead and did it anyway. When Heenan called him out on it, Warrior just said, "I never know what I'm going to do." That might sound exciting to fans, but in wrestling, unpredictability like that can be dangerous. He also clashed with Andre the Giant, one of the most respected guys in the business. Warrior kept hitting Andre with these hard clotheslines, and after taking one too many, Andre finally just stuck his massive fist out mid-match and dropped him. From then on, Warrior was gentle with Andre, but the story spread and made him look reckless. Their matches were so bad that wrestling magazines named their feud the worst of the year. Other wrestlers had similar run-ins with him. Randy Savage, who was famous for planning every detail of a match, once sent Warrior an 18-page fax with their entire WrestleMania 7 match mapped out. Warrior was overwhelmed but followed Savage's lead and pulled it off. Still, it showed how much he relied on more experienced guys to carry him through. Jake Roberts had a big storyline planned with Warrior in 1991, but Warrior quit before it could happen. That cost Jake a lot of money and a planned title run. He was furious at the time, though they patched things up years later. When it came to actual wrestling skill, the Ultimate Warrior was more hype than technique. He looked like a superhero ripped from a comic book. Face paint blazing, neon tassels flying, muscles carved like stone. The moment his music hit, the arena would explode. He'd sprint to the ring at full throttle, shake the ropes like a man possessed. And by the time the bell rang, he was already winded. His matches were short, not because they were booked that way, but because he burned himself out before the fight even started. Opponents had to slow things down just so he could catch his breath. In his legendary WrestleMania clash with Hulk Hogan, Hogan even faked a knee injury mid-match, just to give them both a chance to rest. The critics didn't hold back. Wrestling magazines awarded Warrior Worst Wrestler and Most Overrated more than once. But Warrior himself didn't seem bothered. To him, the gimmick, the energy, the presence, the spectacle was what mattered. And in the late 80s WWF, he wasn't wrong. That era thrived on larger-than-life characters, and Warrior was one of the biggest. But wrestling changed in the 90s. The audience started craving more from the action. Tighter pacing, deeper in-ring storytelling, real technical skill. Warrior never adapted. To the wrestlers who had spent years perfecting their craft, it felt like he was cashing in on the spotlight without putting in the same work. Then came the safety controversies. In WCW, for one of his dramatic entrances, a trapdoor was hidden under the ring. During the match, British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith landed on it, injuring his back so badly he came close to paralysis. For many in the locker room, that was proof Warrior always put showmanship ahead of safety. The Ultimate Warrior was a paradox. He could ignite an arena before throwing a single punch, yet the matches rarely lived up to the energy he brought to the entrance. In the 80s, that was enough to make him a megastar. But as wrestling evolved, the business and the fans moved on. But the hatred for Warrior was far from over. Some of his most explosive fights happened behind the scenes, and Vince McMahon was almost always in the other corner. The summer of 1991 was the boiling point. Just weeks before SummerSlam, Warrior sent Vince a letter that was more like a threat. "Pay me $550,000 or I don't show up for the main event." He said the money was owed from WrestleMania 7, where he believed he'd been promised Hogan money, the kind of huge payoff Hulk Hogan commanded. When the check came in lower than expected, Warrior felt Vince wasn't keeping his word. He even tried going through Linda McMahon, who he saw as someone he could trust, but nothing changed. The timing couldn't have been worse for Vince. SummerSlam's big tag team match was set, and Warrior walking out would blow up the whole card. Vince later admitted he felt he had no choice but to accede to exorbitant demands, just to save the show. He paid Warrior what he wanted, but the second Warrior walked backstage after the match, Vince handed him a suspension letter. Dated August 26, 1991, it accused Warrior of being impossible to work with and of forgetting his obligations to the company and the fans. Vince defended paying Hogan more by pointing out Hogan's fame, longevity, and drawing power. Backstage, the reaction was furious. Hogan and Sergeant Slaughter reportedly wanted to confront Warrior physically. Jake the Snake Roberts, who had a major feud planned with Warrior, was livid. The firing killed the storyline and cost him a guaranteed payday. To most people in the business, it looked like Warrior had just held the company hostage. But from Warrior's point of view, it was his only way to make Vince honor what he saw as a promise. Wrestling was a business without a union or standard contracts, and sometimes the only leverage a wrestler had was the threat of walking. It was risky, and in this case, it blew up his reputation. Vince got his match, then cut him loose without hesitation. A ruthless move, but pure business. It wasn't the last time. In 1992, Warrior was gone again, officially for failing a drug test. Vince claimed he'd been experimenting with growth hormone. Warrior denied it, saying the real problem was unpaid merchandise royalties. He claimed WWF was selling his merch without giving him his share. In 1996, Vince brought him back, only to fire him a few months later. Vince said he'd skipped several house shows. Warrior said he was grieving his father's death. Vince didn't buy it, pointing out they hadn't seen each other in years. Warrior once again claimed it was about merchandise royalties. After leaving WWF, Warrior tried WCW in 1998. His run there was short, dominated by a hyped but disappointing rematch with Hogan and more disagreements over pay. Within months, he was out again. Through it all, a pattern kept repeating. Warrior was unpredictable. He'd miss dates, show up late, or stay away from the locker room entirely. He fought for creative control, refusing to let the company turn him heel because he believed it would crush his merchandise sales. He saw himself as a brand, and he wasn't about to let Vince change it. Yet every time things blew up, Vince would eventually bring him back. If Warrior was truly impossible to work with, why? The answer was simple: money. Warrior was a draw, and when WWF needed a boost, Vince was willing to overlook everything else. As people in the business would say, Vince would put shit behind him if he could make money. Warrior knew it too. He understood his value and wasn't afraid to use it, even if it meant pushing Vince to the edge. Sometimes it got him exactly what he wanted. Other times, it cost him his job. In the short term, he could win. In the long run, it made him unstable in the business. When Warrior's wrestling days were over, the fights didn't stop. They just changed arenas. Instead of a ring, it was courtrooms. And now the battles were about something even more personal than titles or paychecks. Who owned the Warrior himself? In 1993, Jim Hellwig took a step that shocked a lot of people. He legally changed his name to Warrior, not just as a stage name, but his actual legal name. His kids even have Warrior as their last name. It was his way of saying, "This is mine. No one's taking it from me." That move set off years of legal clashes with WWF. In the mid-90s, both sides went to court over who owned the Warrior and Ultimate Warrior names. The look, the face paint, even the way he moved and talked in the ring. This was not just about money, it was about the character's soul. And in a rare win for a wrestler against Vince McMahon's company, the court sided with Warrior. He could use the name, the gear, and the gimmick anywhere he wanted. In a business where the promotion usually owns everything, that was huge. And he did not stop there. Warrior went after anyone he thought was using his image without permission. One case even targeted video game maker THQ for using his designs. When they tried to get it thrown out, the court refused. Time and again, he proved he was serious about protecting what he saw as his legacy. But while Warrior had the legal rights locked down, WWE had another weapon: the power to tell the story. In 2005, almost 10 years after he had last worked for them, the company released the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior. On paper, it was a career retrospective. In reality, it came across like a 90-minute roast with no punchlines. The documentary was packed with old footage and interviews from wrestlers and staff. Almost all of them were negative. They said his promos made no sense. They called him unprofessional. They tore into his in-ring work. Critics called it a hit piece and could not believe WWE would put so much effort into trashing their own former star. WWE had invited Warrior to take part, but he refused. He did not want anything to do with their version of the story. That decision meant his voice was not in it, and the only voices left were the ones that did not have much good to say. Bruce Pritchard, a WWE executive, later claimed the negativity was not intentional, just honest opinions. But to Warrior, it felt like character assassination. In early 2006, a few months after the DVD came out, Warrior sued WWE in Arizona, accusing them of damaging his reputation. He said the whole thing was wrong, and more importantly, hurtful. For him, it was not just business, it was personal. The case dragged on for years before being dismissed in 2009. WWE had won that fight. For Warrior, it was a bitter loss after his earlier victories over the company in the trademark battles. He still owned the Warrior name, but WWE controlled the bigger stage, and with it, the louder voice. A lot of people saw the DVD as WWE's way of getting even after losing the rights to his character. For almost 2 decades, the tension between Warrior and WWE never really cooled. The lawsuits, the public shots, the constant push and pull over his legacy all became part of the ongoing war. That is why what happened in 2014 shocked so many people. Out of nowhere, the two sides made peace. Warrior returned, and Vince welcomed him back into the fold. That April, he stood on stage at the WWE Hall of Fame, finally being celebrated by the same company that had once tried to bury him. It did not erase the years of bad blood. The firings, the lawsuits, the hit piece documentary all still existed. But for one moment, it did not matter. Warrior had fought for his name, for his image, and for the right to define himself. And now, under the bright lights one last time, he got to stand there as the man he had spent decades fighting to be, Warrior. In conclusion, the heat around the Ultimate Warrior wasn't just about one thing. It was a mix of his behavior in the locker room, the way he worked in the ring, and the constant battles he had with Vince McMahon and WWE. A lot of wrestlers, big names like Andre the Giant, Bobby Heenan, Randy Savage, and Jake Roberts, all had stories about Warrior being unreliable, hard to deal with, and sometimes downright unprofessional. In the ring, Warrior had the look, the energy, and the crowd on his side. But his matches often told a different story. He wasn't known for technical skill, and his stamina was a problem. He could blow himself up just from his entrance. That meant slower matches, tired pacing, and in some cases, dangerous moments for the people working with him. Part of the tension came from Warrior's own philosophy. He openly believed wrestling wasn't really about skill, it was about the gimmick. In the late 80s WWF, he wasn't wrong. Big characters sold tickets. But as wrestling moved into the 90s and fans started wanting more from the matches themselves, Warrior didn't adapt. To the guys who had spent years mastering the craft, that felt like a slap in the face. His relationship with Vince McMahon was its own saga. The most famous clash came before SummerSlam 1991, when Warrior threatened to skip the main event unless he was paid what he claimed he was owed from WrestleMania 7. Vince paid him to keep the show alive, and then fired him right after the match. This became a pattern. Warrior would leave, come back, clash again, and leave once more. Vince tolerated it because Warrior drew money, but the tension never went away. Even after he stepped out of the ring, the fights kept going. Warrior legally changed his name to Warrior and went to court to secure the rights to his character. He actually won those battles, a rare victory against WWE. But in 2005, WWE fired back in their own way with the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, a DVD that painted him in the worst possible light. Warrior sued over it, but the case was thrown out. In the end, Warrior's legacy is a mix of brilliance and chaos. He was a larger-than-life star who could electrify a crowd like few others, but also a polarizing figure who burned bridges everywhere he went. The animosity wasn't from one incident. It was the sum of years of professional clashes, personal disputes, and battles for control over his own name. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Ultimate Warrior's wild career, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Was he a misunderstood icon, or exactly what his critics said he was? And if you want more untold wrestling stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.